Welcome back to Rule of Reason, everyone. As you can see, I'm not out and about like I usually would be. That's because it's pouring rain here today. But as is, it's timely that I get this content out with the election being less than 2 weeks away. I wanted to record. So here we are with more of a traditional podcast setup, and I hope that's okay. We'll see how we go with that today. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about cost of living and housing crisis. I'm going to discuss a number of what people are saying are contributing factors, and I'm going to try to just quickly explain why those things alone aren't enough to cause the issues that we are seeing. And I am then going to touch on what I would do if I was able to write the policy, implement the policy as the person in charge, to offer you an alternative viewpoint or thought process. So when you go in to vote, you can think, maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't. But if you agree with me, you can think, okay, that seems pretty common sense and he's a pretty normal guy. If he can think of that, why can't the government think of that? But what you'll see is I will explain the policy that I think needs to be done and the cost of that policy. And then I will show you how I would offset those costs. One really important thing whenever the government says, we're going to do this for you to make cost of living better, the first question you should ask is, how are you going to pay for that? Because nothing's free, right? And if they don't have a way, then it means that they're just going to borrow money. They're going to print money, which basically devalues your cash. So the money that you earn is worth less. Or they're going to borrow it from overseas and increase the national debt, which is only going to cripple our country further in the future. It's just kicking that can down the road. So let's get straight into it. All right, so let's start with the housing crisis. So a number of the reasons why we have a housing crisis is cost of living. So people can't afford to buy a house. There are people saying immigration is a problem. So mass immigration then means it's a supply and demand issue. There's construction issues. So you either have construction businesses not able to build at a fast enough rate for the growth of the population, or there's so much government red tape that the time that it takes to actually build property is just way too long. And then on top of that, because of, as we touched on a second ago, cost of living, and that extends out to the cost of materials for building, access to materials, because there have been shortages out the other side of COVID. A lot of construction businesses are actually going under because there's no profit margin for them because the cost of materials is so high. Or if they don't go under, they're then having to put up their prices to make a profit, and therefore that pushes up the cost of a house, and so on, as you can see. The problem with construction is that it takes a long time. A perfect example of that is the Labor government said that they were going to build 1.2 million houses over 5 years. And as far as I'm aware, we're now 3 years into their time in office, and they've built zero. So, I mean, that's just ridiculous. But you can see how promising to build houses to fix the problem doesn't fix the problem for anyone today. It might start to fix the problem in 5 years or 10 years, but right now, anyone who's struggling to get a house, those policies aren't going to fix it. When the Greens say we're going to build 100,000 houses, that's great, and you do need to build houses, but it's not going to fix the problem right now. And so my policy that I want to talk about is actually what I'm hoping, and maybe it's naive, but what I'm hoping is a solution to the problem that will supply housing into the market in the next 12 months. I guess the one problem with my policy, if you were to call it that, is the dilution of the housing market will decrease house prices. So investors, probably in particular boomers who bought a whole bunch of houses and that's like their retirement fund, they're not going to be happy because their nest egg, their investment for their retirement will be worth a lot less. But the question that I put to you is, when it comes to picking sides or picking groups in the population to prioritize when it comes to writing policy, do you pick the people who are at the end of their working career, who are no longer contributing anywhere near as much to the economy and are realistically in the back end of their life? Or do you put value on those who are trying to get started, who are the future generations, who will be paying all of the tax, who will be contributing to the economy, who want to have a family, who want to have a house, who want to have a job? I would argue that the number one priority should be the young people. And so if that means putting in policy that's unpopular with wealthy retirees, that's fine, because someone's going to lose out, and it's better to be them than young people. Probably going to be unpopular with a lot of people to say that, but hear me out. So as I touched on at the start, it's always, always, always important that if a member of parliament or the government suggests a policy and you go, gee, that sounds good. The Greens are going to build 100,000 houses. The Labor Party is going to build 1.2 million houses. You need to ask them, how are you going to pay for it? Because if they don't have a legitimate way to pay for it, we are all going to pay for it in the long run. Now, here's my policy. I'm going to refer to my notes a little bit today because I've got a lot of numbers in there and I haven't got them all memorized. Hear me out, and I'm really keen for you all to comment. Let me know if you think I'm wrong. Let me know if you think I'm right. Maybe I'm completely naive and I'm living in this dream state. But I'd like to think that this is pretty practical and really not that hard to fix. And what I want to do is I want to start by tackling the cost of living problem and then moving on to tackling the housing problem. So the policies collectively, because I have a number of them here that I've suggested, will cost the government $26.7 billion. But once I've shown you how or what I think needs to change, I'm then going to discuss with you how I would offset that. So the government is not drawing down debt to do this. And what it will do is it's going to put more money in everyone's pocket. It's going to prioritize Australian citizens first, because that should be our job. Our number one priority should be our citizens first, others second. So, let's go. The first point I want to make is I want to raise the tax-free threshold. At the moment, if you earn $18,200 or more, you are now paying tax on your income, and that's outrageous. No one should be paying tax on their income, on an income that you can't make ends meet. How in this country, in Australia, that's outrageous. So I propose that the tax-free threshold for income tax is increased to $40,000. Now, ideally, I would actually like it to be $50,000, but just for the sake of crunching numbers and making it work, we'll start with 40, and then future, if that was to be implemented, you could then look at increasing it in the future. But this is where we'll start. It will cost $15.2 billion annually, just for that one change, to increase from $18,200 up to $40,000. But I would argue that that is $15.2 billion far better off in your pocket than in the government's pocket. And I think most of you would agree with that. The next step that I want to do is I want to change the interpretation of where high income comes in. So at the moment, if you earn $190,000 or more, you will pay 45 cents on the dollar for every dollar over $190,000. Now, I know a lot of you listening will think, well, that 190 is a lot of money. And it is. But at the same time, I've actually never been a fan of increasing tax rates, because that's just taxing the rich to give to the poor. That's disincentivizing people to earn more money. And yeah, I'm not a fan of that. I won't go into the reasons why. But what I suggest that we do is we change the 45% tax rate to a 42% tax rate, and we increase the threshold to $300,000 a year. So instead of paying 37% income tax up to 190 and then 45 above that, you pay 37% all the way up to 300,000, and then it's 42% above that. Because the percentage of the population that earn that much money is obviously a more narrow band, it's a cost of $3 billion. But again, I have offsets for it. And what it does is it allows people who have worked hard to earn more to then have more of their own money and hopefully to invest that back into our economy, which will make Australia stronger anyway. The next thing I want to do, and this applies to my family because my wife is a stay-at-home mother, is if you have one income in your household, then you should be taxed according to the amount of adults working in your house. So, for example, I work so that my wife can stay home and raise our kids. Therefore, my income tax should be calculated on my gross income divided by 2. Because, as an example, if you earn $100,000 and there's another couple that both work and they both earn $50,000. Both households are earning $100,000, but the person earning $100,000 will pay significantly more tax than the family earning 2 times $50,000. Now, I'm sure there's an argument in there to be said, well, yes, but because both of those parents have to work, they have other accrued costs with childcare or whatever the case may be. And sure, I understand that. I do. But to disincentivize family policy, I'm a big fan of family policy. I think we have a really big problem in this country with devaluing the family unit. And I think most of the problems in this world stem from broken families. And if we don't encourage mothers or fathers to stay home with their kids and raise their kids, we're going to have a problem like they have in South Korea right now, where birth rates are plummeting to the point where their economy is effectively going to collapse in the next 30 to 40 years because they will only have old people. Their birth rate is 0.4. Replacement rate is 2.1. Now, I won't go into the details of replacement rate and birth rates, but I really want to in another video because that's super, super, super important. And I think it's one of the biggest crises in the world right now. But again, conversation for another time. But the point is, Australia is at about 1.6, heading towards about 1.4. And that has massive economic repercussions long term. And it's because there's no incentive for people to have families. You can't buy a house that provides security for your family. There's not tax breaks for families. I could go on and on and on about family policy, and I will in another video. But the point is, the idea behind this step is to encourage families, for parents to raise their own children so that we can have stable families, because stable families build a stable society. Now, how am I going to raise $26.7 billion? My goal is to raise the money by not taxing Australians, by not disadvantaging Australians. What I want to do is start with a multinational profit sharing tax. Now, what is that? So a description is, it would be a 15% minimum tax on profits shifted offshore by around 150 to 200 multinational businesses that have Australian revenue of over $1 billion. However, there's a 5% credit, so they only pay 10% tax, if they invest in Australia, in infrastructure, in health, in education, in construction of whatever, right? You just go, we're going to tax you 15%. But if you only want it to be 10, you need to make our country great, because you are making money off us. Therefore, you need to strengthen our country if you want to continue to do business here. So that's the first one. The second one is a resource export profit tax. Now, a lot of you will have heard of Punter's Politics. I've discovered him in more recent times. He's a newie boy like me, so it's crazy to think that there's a couple of newie boys out there on the political front trying to inform the general public on these things. He's touched on this. He goes a lot further than I do. I don't think it's quite as simple as, hey, Norway taxes at a really high rate, so let's do the same thing. Again, that's probably a video for another time on deals done with multinational companies who spent their own money to build the infrastructure for the mines that we didn't have in the first place, therefore writing down assets to offset their profits so they don't pay tax, blah, 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 blah. I won't go into that today. Punter's really good at covering most of that sort of stuff. Maybe I can talk with him one day on the pod. That'd be great. But my solution for this resource export profit tax is a 50% tax on profits from coal and gas exports by 50 to 100 foreign-owned companies that have revenue over $1 billion. And it's applied to about $26 billion in taxable profits. So it raises $13 billion annually from firms like Chevron and Glencore, and it captures a fair return on Australia's non-renewable resources, prioritizing foreign entities over Australian taxpayers. And what I mean is the tax is for foreign entities, not for Australians, because remember, Australia first. That's the key. And the third point, this is the sixth thing I've said, the third point is a foreign property ownership surcharge, FPOS, and it's a 2.4% annual surcharge on the market value of Australian real estate worth $2 million for residential or $5 million for commercial owned by foreign non-residents or firms, with exemptions for active development. So the impact is it will generate $6.7 billion annually from approximately $280 to $350 billion of foreign-owned property, so foreigners that own property in Australia. And the purpose is it taxes foreign wealth tied up in Australian land, reinforcing national control while encouraging productive investment. Now, that's just three things and combined. So just to explain, the revenue loss is $26.7 billion. The revenue raised is $7 billion for the multinational profit shifting tax, $13 billion for the resource export profit tax, and $6.7 billion for foreign property ownership surcharge. The net impact is revenue is neutral, fully offsetting the tax cuts with new sources. And the philosophy behind it, as I mentioned to you before, is it prioritizes tax relief for Australians and fairness for high earners, funded by taxing foreign entities before Australians, keeping Australia attractive for investment through incentives and moderate rates. Now, I'm sure there are people out there that would look at what I've said and think, well, we should tax these multinational companies more so we can get more. So then you've only used that money. You've used all of that money just for income tax offsets. And yeah, I have. And I think that's important because if you and I have more money, we can spend more money. And if we spend money, especially importantly, spend money here, that stimulates our economy. If all Australians are holding on to their money because cost of living is so tight, that's bad for the economy. So what I'm trying to do is create a base level stimulus that makes your life better, but also builds the economy from the grassroots up. But also, it takes a fair share from businesses, big multinational businesses, that are making billions here and not paying their fair share, like the Australian tax person does with their income tax and all the other taxes that we pay. But giving them a tax break and going, look, we won't tax you as much, but you've got to make our country way better. I think that's a pretty good deal. So that's my solution for the cost of living crisis. If we could do that, that's at least addressing the income and it's addressing how we're going to pay for it. It doesn't address energy problems. It doesn't address the cost of goods. I need an entire video for all of those things. And I will do that at some point. But I'm not going to have time in the next 2 weeks over the election to cover all of those things. At least I don't think so. I'm going to do my best to get these videos out in a timely manner. But I did say I was going to address the housing market. So here's my plan for the housing market. I don't like the concept of, hey, if you're a first homeowner, you don't have to pay stamp duty. And hear me out. Yes, we should remove stamp duty. But if you think about it, that stamp duty alone is you're not going to suddenly go, oh, well, thanks. Now I can afford to buy a house. That's not going to fix the problem. Just like empty promises from parties saying we're going to build hundreds of thousands of houses, that still doesn't fix the problem right now. The other thing that a lot of people haven't considered is where are they going to build these houses, right? If you live in Melbourne, if you live in Sydney, if you live in Brisbane or Perth or wherever, the land available for building that many houses is right on the outskirts of the CBD, like of the city limits, I should say. And I would argue that the average young person doesn't want to live out there. Now, what I will say, and I'm digressing a little bit, is if you look at the older people who are selling their houses, within 5 kilometers of the CBD and going, oh my gosh, they got their house so cheap and now it's worth so much and it's never going to be like that for me. Firstly, yes, that is true. But secondly, I would urge you to at least consider in 1960, 70, in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, any of the capitals, that 5 or 6 Ks from the CBD was an outer suburb. So that generation, my parents and even their parents, did make sacrifices in their time that was equivalent to their time. That they did have to live on the outskirts. They did have to buy a cheaper house in an area that perhaps they didn't want to live in. I know my auntie who grew up in Sydney, the only house she could afford in the 80s and 90s was in Redfern. Now, people now will go, oh, Redfern, what a great inner city suburb. But it wasn't back in the 80s and 90s. People were getting murdered there all the time. It was a crime-ridden area. And so it was cheap because no one wanted to live there because it wasn't safe. It just so happened that if you did buy in there and you took the risk of the crime, that as it got cleaned up and the area became a university part of Sydney, that it's now a really affluent part of Sydney. But you had to live through those hard times to get to the good times. So all I'm saying is living out the back of Campbelltown in Sydney, or living out east of, Pakenham in Melbourne, or living out the back of Springfield Lakes in Brisbane and going, oh man, it's an hour and a half drive, 2-hour drive to get to the city from here. Yes, I agree that is not convenient. But if you really, really want a house, maybe that's what's required. So keep that in mind. So all politicians like to give their policies a name, so I might as well jump on the bandwagon. I'm calling this, and it's a terrible, terrible name, 3 homes is enough. And the reason why I call it that is I'm trying to create fair rules for everyday investors. And what I mean is everyone is entitled to 3 properties. The idea being you have your house that you live in. You're entitled to a holiday home if you have the money to be able to do that. And you can have 1 investment property on top of that. 1, 2, 3. Nothing changes for 99% of Australians. But if you go beyond those 3 properties, that's where my policy comes in. Because I don't want to cripple what a lot of people use as sort of their safety net for their future. They want to have their investment property. They want to have a holiday house or something where they can go with their kids and their friends. And then when they retire, they want to sell that and use the profit to sit on it, because superannuation, and again, another video to go into because super's a terrible idea, it's not likely to prop up most people in their retirement. So it's good to have something else on the side. So I don't want to chastise those people. But the idea is, and this is point number 2, there are no more tax breaks for property hoarders. Once you hit property number 4, so 4 or more, we're going to remove negative gearing. There's going to be no capital gains tax discount on the sale of your 4th property and beyond. And it means that if you're hoarding homes, well, there are others who can't find anything to rent or buy, well, that's it. Because my belief is the housing market is not an investment market. It's an ownership market for people to live in. If you are a savvy investor, there are plenty of other sectors that you can invest in that will make you more money and have more opportunity than the housing market. But the housing market is safe and stable for a reason. And so people are making money off that. And I'm not touching commercial property. If you are a savvy investor and you want to invest in commercial property, that's totally fine. But residential property is for individuals so they can have a home. The other thing that I want to do is I basically want to disincentivize investing. So if you have 4 or more properties, we're going to increase land tax on your 4th, 5th, any extra properties. The more properties you have, it'll cost you more to hold on to them because of the taxation system that I intend to implement. And that's not to cripple investment. It's to get you to redirect your funds somewhere else. there's no point investing in the housing market if it's not a viable investment. So all of these taxes will encourage people to basically take their properties from 4 and up and get rid of them, because there's no point holding on to that money anymore. So you want to sell off those properties and reinvest that money somewhere else. The next thing, empty blocks of land. This really annoys me. The amount of empty blocks of land you see sitting around not being used, it is ridiculous. So I propose if you have land that you haven't built on within 2 years, you're required to sell it. No more hoarding land that could be used for other people to build a house on. There's no more land banking while prices rise and families go homeless. It's effectively use it or lose it. Housing is for Australians. So this is another big one that I'm quite passionate about, and this again comes back to my Australians first idea. I had hoped to get this video done before this rain kicked in, but you can see this is why I'm not out walking today. And the theme of what I've been talking about today, and this is point number 5, is housing is for Australians. Now, if you immigrate here and you are a resident or a citizen, that's totally fine. I'm not saying it's not for you. But what I am saying is if you are not a citizen and you're not a permanent resident, you can't buy residential property. Like it is off limits. It's for Australians, this housing market. I also think if you've been overseas for over 12 months and you can't prove Australia is still home or that you have no intention to return, then you need to sell your properties. So in New Zealand, their ruling is if you haven't been in it for 6 months, it's out. It's got to go. You got to sell it. So I'm giving you 12 months and being a bit more lenient. But Australia is not a safe deposit box for the global elite. So same thing. If you're a foreigner, you cannot buy in our market. If you come here and you buy up all this property and then you leave again, if you have no intention of coming back, you have to sell it. Homes in Australia should be for Australians, not foreign investors who don't live here. Don't rent their properties and don't contribute to our communities. All of these policies are about contributing to Australia and making Australia better. So the goal is to make more homes, lower rents, and giving people a fair go. It's about making sure that success doesn't come at the expense of everyone else. So if you're using our housing market like a game of Monopoly, it's game over. No more of that. We are not supporting people who are crushing the general population to make themselves wealthy. The housing market is not for that. There are other ways that you can do that. If you're as good at investing as you think you are, you'll find another way to make money. Based on the data that I've found off the internet, if that policy encourages every investor who owns 4 or more properties, which, by the way, the percentage, so of all investors in the Australian housing market, 3.7% own 4 or more houses. So hardly any. So I'm not talking about policies that are going to affect 96% of investors in Australia. And that 3.7% owns 400,000 homes. Approximately. It could be as high as 500,000 on estimates. So if we were to say that those people no longer saw the housing market as a viable investment and they dumped 400,000 houses back into the market over the next 12 months, that would make a significant difference to, 1, the houses that are available, but 2, I would argue that it would drop house prices because the market now has oversupply. That might seem bad to those that want to hold on to their house or sell it to make more profit, but for those of you who are trying to get ahead and get your first home, it's going to make houses much more affordable and in a short-term window, as opposed to waiting for houses to be built. Do they need to be built? Yes, and that is going to be a 5, 10, 20-year plan, but we need something to fix the problem now, and that's what I'm hoping that this is. So it's not an anti-investor policy. It's just pro-common sense, rule of reason. I am trying to make common sense common again. I've always said that if I'm going to make a policy, that I'm going to provide practical solutions. And that includes for investors who are sitting there going, well, all I know is housing, and so what you're going to do is crush my investments. No, you can go into the stock market, ASX, ETFs, dividends. You can do build-to-rent or social housing projects, build bonds and infrastructure projects, private business and innovation. There are so many things that you can do outside of the housing market. So You've just got to use your brain a little bit. But the housing market is for the citizens of Australia, not for big business, really wealthy people, and not for foreigners at all. That is off limits. It's a policy about fairness and not about envy. Just to clarify, I don't want this to come across as, oh, you're just envious of those that have made heaps of money. No, I'm not. I'm not at all. I want opportunity, not punishment. People can still build wealth. You can still invest. You just can't do it in houses while we have Australians sleeping in cars. This is how we build our nation, not just the housing market. We're going to build a nation where your kids, my kids, their kids have a market where they can still afford to live, buy, and build a future. I hope you found that helpful. I rambled a lot today. I have a lot on my mind, a little bit distracted by the weather, as you can see. But I really hope that that's helpful. At least think about it. Compare it to what the government or the other parties are suggesting as solutions and think, does this make sense? Does this pass the pub test? I think this is a much better policy than what the government is offering. Maybe you think I'm wrong. Comment and tell me what you think. If you don't already follow me on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or X, please do so because it'll really support the channel. And join me for the next episode. I'm going to do a special video for Anzac Day because I think it's really important that we honour the diggers, the veterans, the current service people in the Defence Force in this country. So we'll do a video on that. And there's plenty more things to cover. So stay with me, and thanks for joining me on Rule of Reason.